Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Happy April 20th. We're so happy to have you all here for our Leadership Summit. This is our 7th Leadership Summit of the project. Today, we're going to be focusing on staff retention. I'm going to pass things over to our amazing guest speakers in just a moment. I want to go over just a few things really quickly. Hello, Julie. Welcome. For anyone, if this is your first time joining us for a Great Wardens Project event, we provide mentorship and training to develop bold prison leaders and build a corrections culture based on safety and dignity. Everything that we do is informed by wardens and corrections leaders out there. And we try to just provide these kinds of spaces like this one to have these kinds of conversations that maybe folks don't have the time and space for to have normally. We have a couple really important core beliefs for our project. One being that wardens and superintendents have a responsibility to promote safe, secure, and healthy corrections facilities. The second being that advocates and prison leaders can work together to reimagine how corrections facilities operate and shape a new generation of committed corrections professionals. Our Great Wardens Project is impossible without our amazing task force. We've got a couple members of that task force that are in here, and you can see here they are around the country. These are current or former wardens and superintendents who really kind of give us the kind of insight that we need to be able to provide these discussions for you all. So I want to give them a shout out and thank you. I imagine, what are we, year 3 into this pandemic? I imagine folks are pretty familiar with Zoom, but just in case you're not, there is a mute button right there. This is a conversation. I really want to encourage folks to chime in, whether that's via the chat. You can also unmute yourself to ask a question at any point if you'd like to. Feel free to have your video on or off, whatever feels right for you. And then, of course, the chat, I think everyone has introduced themselves, but feel free to ask any questions in there as well. If you do want to join in on the conversation and you'd like to raise your hand, that function is available in the reactions function right here. You can raise your hand and then that'll alert us that you'd like to ask something. Finally, for anyone who is on our Great Wardens Project newsletter, you should have received the announcement for our amazing Leadership Academy. I'm really excited to be able to share this information with you all listening as well. The Great Wardens Project Leadership Academy is a new opportunity for corrections officials to get personalized coaching, to sharpen leadership skills, and to engage with peers and other experts in the field. This is a hybrid sort of virtual classroom / in-person learning opportunity that is completely free, and applications are going to go live May 1st, which is coming up really soon. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you right to our website where you can learn some more about the Leadership Academy. You can also reach out to me directly or go to greatwardens.org to learn more. And with that, I am going to hand the mic over to our esteemed guests who are going to talk about their experience doing stay interviews. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I know I've spoken to some folks that are also really looking forward to it. So I'm so excited that they're here. Jodi and Jacob, you want to take it over?
Sure. We will take it over as your esteemed guest, Jessica. What a nice introduction. We appreciate it. Hello, everybody. So my name's Jake Sadon, and this is Jodi Glitzenstein. We'll tell you who we are here in a moment. But, you know, like Jessica said, for us, this is an interaction. We are interactive folks. So don't hold your questions to the end. Interrupt us and ask. And if you want to shout it out, that's probably my preferred way. But if you want to put it in the chat, that's fine too. Like if you don't want us to hear your voice, it's cool. We are super informal. So yeah, professional. So you know, feel free to be the same way. Just talk to us, right? We're happy to have the conversation. So you know, we're going to talk. The title, right, of what we're going to talk about is stay interviews. We're going to dig deep into this and you know, some related topics about it. But before we do that, we'll tell you a little bit about the agency that we work for, which is called Oriana House. So we are in Ohio. Okay, where we're sitting right now is in Akron, Ohio, in northeastern Ohio. about half an hour, 40 minutes south of Cleveland, of Lake Erie, if you're trying to get a reference there. So yeah, we're sitting in Akron, Ohio, but we work for a company called Oriana House. Oriana House is 42 years old. We're an agency that's been around for 42 years now. We started in Akron, Ohio, and we started, we started in Akron, Ohio, but now we are covering most of Ohio in some capacity. In what we do especially on the correction side of things, we cover most of Ohio now. Not so much Columbus and Cincinnati, but most of Ohio outside of that. So what do we do? Like what is our agency? So we're a private nonprofit, right? So we are not a government agency like most of you. However, what we do is community corrections and behavioral health. Okay, so we have been doing corrections for 42 years. So we get it. We do not operate giant prisons. There's no question there. Most of our community corrections programs, the residential ones, are gonna, the best way to picture them is like a minimum security jail kind of thing. It's smaller, some of them have 60 beds, some of them have 160 beds, 200 beds, but we don't have anything, I don't think, that goes over 200. So on the correction side of things, we do that, right? Community corrections. We offer non-residential corrections too, that are kind of probation-like, parole-like, if you want to think of it like that. And then, a side of our business too is behavioral health, the treatment side, right? The clinical side. So that's who we are, right? So we do community corrections, behavioral health, kind of all over Ohio, but mostly in the northern half, we'll say, with the residential correction side of things. But that's who we are. If you've never heard of us, which wouldn't surprise me if you're not from Ohio. And like I said, we've been around for 42 years. We have roughly, actually now we have over 800 staff. 804 staff. That's over 800.
It's over
804. Those four are important. 804 staff. So that if you kind of get a scope of the size of our operation, compared to yours, ours is 804, right? And those are actual employees, not contractors or interns or anything like that. So when you add in paid contractors and stuff like that, just like you all, the number is really much higher. But yeah, so that's who we are. So Jessica, we can go on. And just so y'all know, Jessica's controlling our slides, which is very nice of her. So if at any point I'm like, Jessica slide, that's why I'm saying that. So who we are, I'll introduce Jodi and then she can introduce me. So Jodi is our Director of Human Resources, okay? She has been at Oriana House for 30 plus years, almost 31?
We're 31 in August.
Okay, not almost 31 yet. Over 30 years here just at Oriana House, right? She has an MPA in public administration, if you're curious about the educational side of things. She is a proud United States Army veteran. And Jodi wants to refinish furniture. So I put it in there because I said, what do you want in your bio? She's like, I want to refinish furniture. So anyway, that's about her, but she's our Director of Human Resources, right? Tons, obviously, a whole adulthood of employment here, doing this work, doing HR at a correctional agency, right? And that's important, to stress that, yes, we do the treatment stuff too, but since the beginning, the core of our business has really been this correction side, like where you all work. So that's her.
And Jacob is our staff development manager. He started out in one of our residential programs as a caseworker, and then he became a lead resident supervisor. So he supervised some of our line staff, and then he was promoted.
It was like an operational supervisor kind of job.
Right, supervised our line staff, working with our clients, and then came to work in our staff development department and has been promoted several times, and is our staff development manager now. So he's been with Oriana House for over 15 years. I have the pleasure.
Over 16 years,
over
actually.
16 years
now.
now.
Yeah, I need to update this.
So I have the pleasure of supervising him. He has a master's degree in justice studies, and he has no desire to refinish furniture. So
none whatsoever.
when I retire, that's what I want to do for fun.
I will happily buy my furniture from Jodi as opposed to rebuilding.
Come visit my workshop, Jacob.
Fair enough. Okay, so that's who we are. Where do we work, right?
So I want to talk a little bit about a stay interview. I know a lot of people are very familiar with exit interviews, whether they are given to staff members verbally when they have decided to leave the organization, whether we tend to mail ours when staff members leave the organization. Actually, they're sent electronically. We send them a link through SurveyMonkey. So a lot of people tend to think about exit interviews. There's a lot of data on stay interviews. So why are people staying, and what can you do to capitalize on why people are staying? And are there areas that you can improve on internally to get people to stay? So you're interviewing your current employees to see what they like, what they don't like. How engaged are they? Are they likely to leave? Are some on the cusp of leaving? Their likelihood of resigning within a certain time frame. Are there improvements, certain things that you can do? Sometimes there are easy things that you can change. Are they satisfied with their job, and are they satisfied with the organization? And the nice thing about a stay interview is that you can customize this for your workplace. If you see a trend, or if you hear certain rumblings among your staff or a certain class of staff, you can customize it. I know one of the things that we have seen here, we've seen a trend with supervisors, like our middle management. So I knew one of the things that I wanted to focus in on when putting together the stay interview was really honing in on asking questions about relationships between staff and their supervisors. So that's one of the things I wanted to delve into. But you can delve into anything that you really want to delve into on that stay interview. Do we have questions yet?
No, I have things.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, you know, it's so easy to say nobody stays and everybody's leaving, right? But the truth is, some of your people are staying, and we can harness. Like Jodi said, they're kind of overlooked sometimes for the problem of leaving. You know, we overlook this group who is actually staying and saying, well, why are you staying? You know, that maybe that's important too. And like she said, that's not to say exit interviews aren't important, but it's a new take on, instead of only looking at why are people leaving, why are they staying? What's keeping them here, right? And a point that I always like to make at the beginning of this is, in the workplace, we're not going back to the way things used to be, where everybody's going to stick around forever, right? It's just not going to happen. And so we need to be real about our expectations too, that this idea of people leaving, it's not going to suddenly switch to everybody staying for 50 years too. I'll give you a great example that I like to use real quick, and I'll test your trivia knowledge here. So I need your participation. So I grew up I was born here in Akron, Ohio, and I've lived my adult life here in Akron, Ohio, and my parents are from Akron, Ohio, and my grandparents were not from Akron, Ohio, but came to Akron, Ohio at a very young age. So I never had the benefit of meeting either of my grandfathers. I promise this is going somewhere. I never had the benefit of meeting either of my grandfathers, unfortunately, but they both worked in Akron, Ohio. So does anybody have a guess as to what they did for a job in Akron, Ohio? My grandfathers. A little bit of trivia there about what is Akron famous for? Does anybody know the answer to that?
The chat is blowing up.
I have a guess, but it's probably wrong.
What's the guess?
I want to let our participants see if I'm in California. I've never been to Ohio, although I will be next week for the NAS conference, which I'm excited about. But
nice.
Not miners. We actually don't have much mining in Ohio. Next door in PA and West Virginia, we do. You're getting closer there with cars, Tara. Tires, Allison.
Yes.
Allison, who are you? Tell us who you are. You want a prize. It's not.
Hi, I'm a JDI staff member. I'm from Buffalo, New York, and I have family in Ohio. So
okay. So you're not.
I got a leg up.
You are 4 hours close to us. So Akron, Ohio, right? Famous for tires. Goodyear, Firestone, Goodrich, At one point, the world headquarters for all of them were right here, right? My grandfathers, when they came of age, this is what they did. Uncle whoever took them down to Goodyear and said, hey, here's where you're going to be. And you know what they said? I never got to meet my grandfathers, but this is what I imagine they said. Okay. And they did it for 30 years. They breathed in black carbon and chain smoked, for 30 years, got their pensions, and went about life. And we're thrilled to do it. And we just need to be real that that's not going to happen again, right? That before we even talk about people staying, we need to have a realistic expectation that not everybody's joining your agency to work for 25, 30 years, retire with a pension and be happy as a clam. Like, it's just not going to be like that. So we need to be real about our expectations too. And I like that story about my grandfathers, because it's just times have changed, right? Like, it was different generational thinking 2 generations ago compared to the middle generation and probably the one after that, and then the one that I'm in. It's just wildly different, much less with the 21-year-olds that you're getting into your buildings now, right? Different mindsets, and that's important to acknowledge too. Sorry, I want to take a minute to do that. You can go ahead there, Jessica.
No, that makes sense.
Good job, Allison.
Yeah, that was not going to be my guess either. So I'm I'm glad that Allison.
Jessica? What was your guess?
I was going to say something with steel.
Okay. That would have been decent too, but
yeah, I was in the ballpark, right?
Close enough. Okay.
So as far as why do a stay interview? It takes some time, it takes some resources, but we all know, whether we're working in HR or any other department, that there's a lot of competition out there to hire employees and to retain employees. So it is definitely worth the time to invest. So doing a stay interview can help you reduce turnover. Just asking employees for their input is like, hey, they care about me. So just that fact alone is important. It can help increase satisfaction among employees. There might be small changes that you can make that will help increase that job satisfaction. It helps show that your organization is taking an active role or showing an interest in improving the experience. So the leadership development and the needs among the wardens and the correctional leaders, that is a big deal. I know I'm also working on a project right now with the Ohio Community Corrections Association. So basically this concept has taken root and we're looking across the state of Ohio. Why did people come to work in corrections and what's keeping them in corrections? And it's a conglomeration. OCCA is a conglomeration of 11 different agencies that want to look at this information for their staff. So a lot of people are really taking a hard look at their agencies. What are we doing right? What can we improve upon? And it also just gives an employee an opportunity for input. Hopefully the supervisors working with them every day give them input in their day-to-day jobs and decisions that are being made. But this gives an employee an opportunity for input, anonymous input that's going to be seen at a very high level in the organization once the results are aggregated and shared, and input that's going to come back because they're going to see the results. So that's the overall purpose of the stay interview.
And that input piece, right? We know too, I mean, this would be a whole separate presentation, but we know too from research that input is one of the things that especially the younger generation really wants to have in the workplace, right? I'll give you a great example, and you don't have to necessarily answer, but you could say yes or no. Have you ever had a new hire who comes in and it feels like they want to be a commander, a lieutenant, the warden, like their 3rd week on the job? They're like, I should be doing this, right? And it's easy to like dismiss that, right? But if we really look at it, that's somebody who cares, right? Like, it's easy. We get kind of mad. We judge it. We're like, oh man, you got to pay your dues before you get to make those decisions. But the truth is, they want input, right? It doesn't need to be tempered, yes. It doesn't need to be tamped down just a little bit, yes. But they want input, and this is something that really can't go overlooked. The value in and of itself of seeking people's input, as long as they don't think it's fake. Okay, so let's go on to the types and purpose of delivery. Like how would I do a stay interview? Some things that we need to talk about first, right? So spinning right off of that input notion, the input has to be appropriate, right? So when doing this, right, we have, like for us, we needed to develop a survey that employees actually are willing to respond to honestly, right? If I just sit, like a great example, if I sit down with Jessica and whoever Jessica's boss is, and I say, Jessica, how's your boss? Well, they're good. She's not going to be honest with me. I mean, hopefully it is good, right? Hopefully that's the right answer. But so we have to think about what's the best way to get this to somebody so that they're going to tell me the truth, not just what I want to hear, not just pencil whip it, and also not go the other way of totally just venting for no reason, where it gets ridiculous, which we will give you some examples of that too later on. So when doing that, right, we have to look at this idea of doing a survey anonymous versus named, right? Obviously, if someone is named, most surveys that you take in life, right, are not named, right? And it makes sense because if I feel like my information can be a little bit more anonymous, I might feel a little bit more open that, okay, Jodi's not going to come back to me and sit down with Jacob and say, Jacob, why did you say this one thing about this one person? And I'm like, whoa. I'm going to feel a little bit less scared. Let's say that way, a little less scared. So, we certainly did ours anonymous. That's definitely going to be a research way to go about it. Right. But it's something to think about, right? There's a benefit of named things too, or surveys too, but for our stay interview, it was anonymous, right? Now, there were some open-ended fields, which we'll get to. If someone chooses to provide some sort of identifying information, that's on them. But we made it clear from the beginning that wasn't expected. And really, we didn't want people to do that, right? We wanted this to remain truly anonymous. That being said, we did gather some demographic information, which we'll talk about, but it was broad enough that no one could be individually picked out, right? And then the delivery method, is how do we do it? Do we do it electronic? Do we just send them an email with a link, right? Do we send them an actual piece of paper and somehow get it back and aggregate that data? Do we sit down with them, right? I've been a part of some research surveys, for example, that were face-to-face, they were interviews. So we got to think about that. Something to consider. Ours was electronic, right? We wanted to offer this to 800 people. There's no way that was going to be done face-to-face. And there's no way that we were about to try to do that on paper and figure out the results. So ours was electronic, right? Another thing that you have to consider is the length of the document. I'll give you a great example of length and a chance to vent about the world a little bit, because I'm like that. It's my passive-aggressive way of getting back the United States Census Bureau right here. So this year, like in January, the US Census Bureau sent me at my house in just north of Akron this survey. And I'm like, well, it's not a census year. So I didn't really pay attention to it. Then they sent it to me again. We're like, hey, you have to do this under penalty of law, blah, blah, blah. So I looked at it and it was like, I started looking at it, and by like the 43rd question, I was like, how long is this thing gonna take me? And are they paying me to take it? Because this is getting wild. This isn't just like how many people live in your house. It was like, how much did you pay for your electric bill this month compared to last month, and your water bill compared to last year, and how much frontage do you have on your street, and do you have sidewalks? I'm like, whoa, right? The length of it ended up being, when I finally sat, for what it's worth, they ended up having to threaten me. Somebody came to my house. I didn't even tell you that. My wife was home alone, and some dude came to the house, was like, hey, you guys have to do this survey, because I had been putting it off. And the only reason I put it off was because it was so long. I'm not a bad citizen. I'm happy to help. But so finally one night I sat down and did it. It took us 63 minutes, right? That's long. That's, in my opinion, that's long for like a help us out kind of survey, right? So I put it off. The same exact thing was going to happen with our employees. If it's even like 25 minutes, they're not going to do it. They're going to check out, right? So we got to think about length, but we have to be real, right? I need more than 2 minutes of your time, but less than like 30. So I think ours really did come in, depending on how much you typed on the open space questions, probably 10 to 12 to 15-minute range. But it's something to consider, right? Because just in my example there, people will tune out absolutely on this. You know, on the exit interviews, you tend to get people because they will happily put things that they're mad about, right? But on this one, there's a lot of we're asking people who aren't necessarily mad or worked up about stuff. So we want them to answer. We needed it to be as short as reasonably possible while still getting some questions asked. Right? So same thing with the time needed. And then the ease of completion, right? Not only time, but how hard is it to physically do? Do you have to click 45 times to get into the survey or just twice? Right? So we tried to limit that down to one link in an email. And it would take you right to the survey, and then you could do it. So you don't have to log in and go anywhere or set up an account or download something. It's just set, right? And then impression. This is an important thing. Hold on, Tara, I just saw your comment. See, now you're gonna make me feel bad. For the record, I did it eventually, and I have nothing against the United States Census Bureau. It was just really long. Anyway, so I'm pro your husband, Tara, don't worry. Anyway, impression of the survey. What we mean by that is the staff have to have a positive impression to be willing to do it, right? And what I mean by that is, if a staff member opens the email, sees this and thinks, oh, this is a bunch of BS, their likelihood of completing that survey is low. And their likelihood of completing it thoroughly is even way lower. So there's a sales piece of this too, to sell it, to say, hey, here's what we're gonna do with this. Here's what it is. Here's how long it's gonna take you. And here's why we sincerely appreciate you doing it, right? So that it doesn't just look like busy work nonsense, something that some, higher up thought of and nothing's ever gonna come from it. We really tried to sell it so that it would have a good impression. And I think that's just a really important point to make in one of these is there's a huge sales component to it of this isn't just nonsense. We are actually trying to help the place. Okay, so who to survey?
Who do you want to survey? Since we had never done a stay interview before, we wanted to survey everybody. So that's who we surveyed. We gave everyone an opportunity to participate in the survey. If you want to survey just a certain demographic, or I shouldn't say demographic, if you say we just want to survey nurses, or we just want to survey the COs, you can do that too. Or we just want to survey the accounting department. You can target your sample. So it's completely flexible. Or if you say we want to survey everyone this year, and then next year we only want to survey administration, or we only want to survey people who have direct contact with inmates or clients or clinical. So you can completely make your survey work for who you want to work at, who you want to target, which is nice about the stay interview. It's yours. You can completely make it work for how you want it to work. You can also do a random sample. I think in graduate school, maybe a couple of graduate level courses in survey design, which is why I had several people from the research department work with me. So you need to make sure when you're choosing a random sample, it's truly random. If you have 800 employees, you need to statistically make sure that your sample is significant enough so that when you're drawing conclusions, that you're drawing valid conclusions from the size of your sample. So you want to make sure that you've got the subject matter expertise when you're doing a random sample. Any questions so far?
No, I don't think so. I'm keeping an eye on the chat though.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, because we have this problem sometimes, keep in mind that picking the people who you think have a lot to say is not random, right? You're, picking out individual people is not random.
Right, because we have people say, yeah, Jodi, I need to do a random drug screen on Jacob. I'm like, then that's not random. That's a for cause. So if you're saying, yeah, we need to do all the clinicians, that's random. That's not random. You know, so if you're targeting populations, then you're doing a targeted sample. So we need to use the right vernacular when we're talking about doing surveys and other things too. Random is truly random.
All right, so when to do it, right? So when do I do this? Do I just do it whenever the heck I want? You can be totally strategic on there, and there's a need to be strategic too. There's probably times of the year to avoid when people are, like the holidays. I don't know if that's I probably wouldn't do it then, but we want to be strategic, right? When we're doing it, when we know we're going to have time to actually allow the survey to ruminate, kind of like sit out there for a minute too. We'll come back to that in just one second, like how long to leave the survey window open. But I need to think about how long am I going to leave that survey window open? And then am I going to have the time, or are we collectively going to have the time to actually jump into this, run, figure out the statistics and then interpret and then actually change. So this is, we're looking at a year or more long project here, right? Not just putting out 20 questions to people. Ours was starting a year ago now, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, it had already started, hadn't it? Anyway, yeah. And we're still in it. So yeah, I need to offer a large enough time window, right? There was an audit last week at our building. I'll give you a great example. At one of our buildings, you don't know this story. You don't need to know this story. And the state of Ohio was auditing one of our buildings on the clinical side of things. And there was 4 staff who hadn't completed one mandatory training that we didn't know about, for the record. But so I said, okay, hey, you 4 staff, do this by Friday. It's self-paced, it's online, super easy, right? Just do it by Friday. And it was Wednesday. 2 of them did it on time. Okay. And that was something that I actually communicated to them was mandatory for and the reason why it was mandatory, they still didn't do it on time. They ended up doing it by the end of the day because I caught them. But with something that's voluntary, I need to offer an even bigger window, right? There's not this idea, this idea that someone's just going to go complete this right away. Some people will, because that's just how they think. I'm one of the people who won't. I'm one of the people who'll be like, oh, well, that's not on my to-do list today. So I need to think about a large enough time window to say, okay, is a week enough? And the answer is no, right? Like if someone could be on vacation the whole time your survey was open, that's not long enough. So this large window, we offered 90 days, which was 3 months, which we feel was probably right, but maybe just a little bit too long too.
And we have an in-house recruitment and retention committee, and we have composed of a lot of our executive staff, HR staff. Jacob's on the committee. So one of the things that we did was we sent out reminders from individuals on the committee, maybe every other week.
Every week, we did it
every week.
Once a week.
Written by those individuals. So they would get an email from the executive vice president saying, hey, blah, blah, blah. Just wanted to remind you, if you haven't provided input on your stay interview, here it is. Here's the link. And what I did as the director of HR is a lot of times I wrote that reminder for them with the link and said, hey, Bernie, can you send out this reminder? And said, feel free to change the language, but here it is pre-written. So I made it easy for people on the committee, but I knew someone like Jacob would write his own. So I tried to make it easy for the senior leaders to put those reminders out. And when those reminders came out from the senior leaders, I think that had a large impact on our response rate. So they were seeing different individuals on the committee sending out those reminders. And I think that was strategic on our end to get as many responses as we did.
And it was very public and in your face a little bit without being harassing to the employees.
We had a nice balance. Yeah. We didn't harass people.
But we didn't let them forget about it either.
No.
Right.
So gently nudging without being harassed.
Because I'm one of those people who will forget. I'm sorry, I like to tell lots of personal stories when I present. I bought a new car like a month and a half ago, which sucked because it's a horrible time to buy a new car. But you know how they send you, when you buy a new car, they send you like 14 surveys. I didn't do any of them. And now they're starting to send me these reminders or third reminders like, hey, we really want your input. If you just put one out there, people are like me. Like a lot of people are like me. They're just going to put it off and then never do it. So, this idea of in your face without harassing you about it that's where we were trying to be, right?
A good balance
I very much identify with that, Jacob. I'm very much the same way. We actually have a question that came in the chat. And this may be something that you'll cover later on. It says, when an employee provides a suggestion and it's an anonymous survey, is there a way for the employee, to receive feedback on their suggestion?
No and yes. So do you want to answer?
When we got suggestions, what we did was, because we had 800 some people. So what I did, they were able to make suggestions, and then I had to group them into categories, which I think we have them.
Yeah, we're going to cover.
I grouped them into categories. So I was able to group them into categories, and then when I shared the results with employees, I was able to share with them what we are looking at, what we're going to be able to look at, and what might be further out on the horizon.
But
so probably not going to be able to go back to that individual employee.
But we did find a way to do it, right? In the sense of, that which wasn't the focus of our thing, wasn't to provide feedback to one person, right? This was a huge survey. But like she said, we'll talk about too, how we communicated that as a whole to say, hey, here were the biggest classifications of suggestions, and here's what we're doing with that. Yeah. Now, if someone Kevin, if someone wanted to choose to put their name on there was no box for name, but they could have identified.
They could have, or they could follow up.
And there's other channels too, but yeah, no, that's a good question. It was definitely anonymous, so no, not directly back to that individual. Good question. Okay, and just a reminder. So we're like, 20 minutes in at this point. No, we're 40 minutes in at this point. Just a reminder. There's a heavy focus in what we do on recruitment, right? And we talk about recruitment and retention, but the truth is a lot, at least around here and people I talk to in my circles, everybody likes to blame recruitment. Oh, nobody stays, and then everybody comes, and so they like acknowledge retention, but then there's like, well, HR is not getting enough people. They're not hiring us enough people. We don't have enough new cadets, or we don't have enough new officers. We don't have enough new staff. I could tell you at my agency, we have more new staff than ever before, every single month. Our HR department is busting their butt. To say that there's not enough new staff is totally bonkers, right? The problem is those new staff aren't all staying as long as you would like them to, right? So the problem, we like to blame recruitment, but the whole point of what we're talking about is this piece about retention, to say, okay, let's shift a little bit and let's put some of that focus back on retention. Because you know what? We are getting people in the door. They're just not staying. So the ones who are, why are they staying, right? So just a reminder here at this point in the presentation to say, that's really what we're doing, right? Is we really want to look at this retention piece. And why focus on that retention?
Okay, so why do we want to focus on retention? For us, when we looked at our turnover for 2022, we had 53% turnover.
You can advance that slide, Jessica. Thanks.
We had 53% turnover in 2022. We were running at about 190 openings of the 800 employees. So we knew we had to do something. And quite frankly, it's cheaper to keep your existing employees than it is to keep filling the positions over and over. So how keep the people that you have and improve it. Certainly there's turnover that you want to have. So some of the people make bad decisions and they need to go, and some of the people you want to go. But for the people that you would prefer not to go, how do we keep them and how do we get them to stay? So we don't want to keep that churn going so that you have to re-interview, rehire, retrain, and then you have that cycle going over and over again. And as I mentioned before, we know how competitive the job market is. And who has the biggest hiring bonus for nurses and who can get them in the door, and they pretty much write their own salaries. And if someone has a bad conversation with a nurse, she can quit and go start a job tomorrow somewhere else. So we know how competitive it is. So how can we keep people happy where they are and keep them here for a longer period of time. Knowing full well they may not end their career here, but if we could keep them here for a couple of years, that would be a great thing to happen.
We must be having a problem with the nurses, because that's like your 5th nurse example today.
Oh yeah, we have
Fair.
nurses. Nurses can be a struggle.
Those numbers she threw out, those are freaky deaky numbers. 190 openings of our 800 or 900.
Yeah,
right?
it's actually lower now.
Well, right, but those are freaky
high.
deaky numbers, right? And it's easy to judge that, but keep in mind you are or have been in the same boat, right? Maybe the numbers are a little bit different, but I know that you have trouble covering shifts just like we do sometimes. You know, you have in the past couple of years those people cranking out that overtime. So those numbers are scary, but it's that's happening to all of us, right? That's not something that's unique to our region. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, we're down to about 140 now.
All right. So let's talk about what kind of questions to ask. Right? What kind of questions do I really want there, right? So we know that we wanted ours to be as research-based as possible, just like everything else we do with our staff, even when they don't like it. We want to be running evidence-based programs. I want to be running the programs with staff that I know are going to work as much as possible, even though nothing's 100%, right? So we wanted evidence-based questions here too. So, you got to understand the research, right? So what we'll show you is 3 types of questions that we chose to use, which were short answer versus rating questions versus multiple choice questions, right? And we'll look at the benefits and downfalls of each of those here in a second. And we're going to give you plenty of examples of what not to do too. We definitely screwed up some, a couple anyway, a couple that are really funny, of what not to do, right? So let's take a look first at the short answer, right? So you all are quite familiar with the short answer, right? So here's one short answer question that we asked, okay? If you could change one thing about your job, what would that be? Okay, where they could just free form, go in there and type anything and be like, the director of HR, she needs to go. Whatever they want to type, they can type it in there, right? So immediately you see some downsides to that probably of you're going to get really specific answers, and that's hard to aggregate, right? It's hard to classify that. When we have 400 people and they all write something different, it's hard to put a statistic on that and say, well, okay, well, what do I do about that? So what we're looking for with this kind of question isn't necessarily the outliers, it's the trends, right? To see, okay, are people putting responses in here that can fall into trends and classifications like Jodi will talk about in a little bit. But keep in mind with this kind of question, the more short answer you have in here, the harder and longer it's going to be on you as the agency doing this, because you have to just spend so much more time interpreting each individual result instead of clicking a button that says, well, 56% of the people said this. You have to figure out what this data is and what's going on with it. And, you run the gamut here of people who write, I'm sure we had a character limit. I don't know what it was, but you have people who will write a book, and you'll have people who will write nothing and skip the question. And then you'll have people who write F you, right? So it's just all over the board. So there's a benefit those are the downsides. The benefit is, this is where people get to type things that you might not have otherwise covered in the survey, right? So where they can show you some novel ideas, because the questions where they're just answering them from options that you give them, that's your thought process, right? They're in your world. This lets you be in their world a little bit too and see where's their thought, right? So there's downsides and positives to this short answer thing.
Right, you become skilled at reading through responses, coding them, correlating them. It does take time, but this definitely gives staff the feeling that you're asking them, and that this is a good critical question. I think to ask this again, I would probably break it into categories like pay or schedule or something, and have them select from a drop down, and then maybe throw an other in, and then expand on their answers just to help with the coding process. But it's doable. It's just time consuming. And
you also run the risk with this too of getting answers that don't mean anything. Like people just write silly things or they don't understand. Or...
People do pontificate and It's interesting.
Or you just get a confusing answer. Like for this one, the question will be, if you could change one thing about your job, what would that be? And someone answers 7. Like, well, what the heck? What happened there? So, you know, there's a risk in this question of just missing the boat completely too. But there's some value. So let's look at the next one. The next one's a rating kind of question example. Say, here's some criteria. How would you rate it? So this is an example of that. This was question 6 on our survey. Why did you come to work at Oriana House? Rank from 1 for the most important reason to 5 for the least important reason, right? So you've all taken surveys like this, or you know, completed things like this too, where you're ranking it. Say, hey, of these, which is most important to you, right? So this was a rating question. It's a hard one in the sense that there's no ties, so it does force someone to choose 1 through 5, even though if the benefits and the money are like equally weighted to me, I still have to put one in front of the other. So there's maybe a downside there, but the benefits, the benefit of this kind of question too is if people are taking it and really thinking about it, it'll let you know where their thoughts are kind of numerically, and it lets you put some of those short answer stuff into a category. And it certainly is easier to aggregate at the end. Right? So this was one type of question we used. And then the most common type of question we used was a multiple choice question. On the next slide here. So with a multiple choice question, right, you choose from one of my options. So here was question number 16 on our survey. I trust, so it was like a statement and then a level of agreement. I trust the senior leaders at the agency to make the best decisions for employees. It's an interesting question, right? So with these kind of questions, right, easy to aggregate because they can only select one answer, right? Downsides might be, you might have some variance in, like, someone might consider what strongly agrees means as different than what someone else, but for the most part, this helps you, again, kind of see where their head is. The thing about these questions is you really have to think them through, though, right? Because with this question, you know, what am I really getting at? Like, why did we ask this question? Well, we were, you know, this was part of a couple of questions where we're trying to get at, you know, trust of the senior leadership. Like, does someone believe that the right people are in charge? You know, and that's an important thing from research. If someone doesn't believe that the right people are in charge, or if someone believes that the people at the top are corrupt or bad or don't care, then they're not going to be as engaged, right? So that's kind of what this question was. Part of what we're trying to measure with this one too is not, oh, does everybody like, you know, Warden Joe? It's, is there a trust in this system, right? Because I know that if you have trust with the people above you, there's going to be more willingness, you know, both to follow your chain of command, but invested in the work too, right? So you really kind of have to think through these questions and really get at, you know, try to get a picture of what you're really trying to measure, right? So those are the 3 kinds of questions we use: short answer, rating, and multiple choice.
And when you're doing a question like this, it's purposefully a 4-point Likert scale, because you are forcing someone to either agree or disagree and then select on either end of the scale if they want to strongly agree or disagree, instead of putting in neutral, so that you don't have the error of central tendency. And that comes from knowing about statistics in surveys and putting things together. So you want to make sure that you are putting together a survey that's going to give you the kinds of answers that you're looking for. So you don't want to have the error of central tendency on your surveys or on your performance evaluations or those kinds of things.
Yeah. If 800 people come back and say neither agree nor disagree, you haven't really learned much.
Exactly.
So let's talk about interpreting these results now, and then we'll talk about that, and then we'll show you all kinds of questions that we asked.
So when you're looking at the results, you need to be open to what you're reading, and not be defensive, and have a diverse group of interpreters, not just the top level of your organization. So as I mentioned before, we have a recruitment and retention committee. We have individuals in HR. We have a research department. So we actually have a PhD level person who heads our research department. And when I was doing some analysis and looking at statistics and numbers and percentages, he forced me and said, and would ask me hard questions. And And the way he did it, he forced my brain into an analysis mode and said, you know, Jodi, tell me what you're seeing. Tell me about the top 5 to 6 things that you're seeing overall in these numbers. Knowing what my subject matter expertise was in HR and what I saw in the numbers. So it's good to have someone with that subject matter expertise to force me into that realm, because although I had a background in an education, and it's not like I use it all the time. So I had the subject matter expert on board. Our research department uses SPSS to do a statistical analysis, but with these types of questions, SPSS will do those numbers and percentages for you. They'll even do some crosstabs if you want to get into that level of analysis. The only thing SPSS does not do well for you is you can't really push a button and then have it show up beautifully into PowerPoint. So you end up cutting and pasting your labels and everything else. So that's time consuming. But SurveyMonkey does a nice job of doing those percentages and can do charts and graphs and all those nice things for you. You don't have to have a special statistical analysis software unless you want to do super complicated analysis of the data that you pulled.
So I'll just add on there too, just to say too, like, if you only have your warden and deputy warden, say, looking at the results of this, it's a lot easier for them to either intentionally or probably more so unintentionally see it the way they want to see it, right? Good or bad. And if you have a diverse group of people looking at that from all walks of life and all walks of the company, you're going to see things that you might not know are there, right? Like I look at something and I see this, but Jodi might look at it and she sees something completely different, and we can complement each other really nice, right?
So we want to show you some samples of the questions and how I chose to display them, because you're displaying them for multiple audiences. The first audience was the people on our recruitment and retention. The way we chose to do it, and the order in which we chose to do it, was the first audience was the members on our recruitment and retention committee. Then I presented the information to our executive team. Then we presented the information to all of our staff. And then I was asked to present the information to our advisory staff members. So that's how we kind of shared all of the information. So when you're going through and creating charts, you have to try to create them graphically for people in the way that makes sense. So using that, and SPSS helps you out with all of this stuff, depending on how you want to represent them. But some of these data labels, you literally have to pick and paste, and it's some finagling. But here's how our staff responded to feeling committed to the agency's mission statement. So this is hugely positive. So we had, when looking at all of these numbers, overall, we had 95.9% either committed or strongly agree and strongly disagree. So you can see it where it makes sense to have those two categories. We only had those 4 categories. So agree and strongly disagree, 95.9% is huge.
Strongly agree. Strongly agree
and agree. So, and you can see the very small portions of the staff that fell off. You're talking about,
18 staff.
Right, and the number of staff. So I felt it was important to graphically display the percentages as well as the number of respondents.
I'll be Jodi's filter for a second. You got to make it look nice for the people who can't just read a report. And right? There are visual people. I'm one of them too.
I'm visual as well.
Making it look nice is important.
Because some people, you can't just put a chart and a table with numbers, because it doesn't mean a lot to them if it's not graphically displayed.
So I'll point out too, so there were 440, we don't have that number on this slide, that's my bad. But so we have 440 answered there, and you might say, well, that's not 800. It wasn't 800, we didn't have 800 staff a year ago when we were starting this. It was probably more towards 740, 750. But 440 in our mind and in the research world was a good number.
Yeah, we had over 65% response rate on our survey. And I think that's because we allowed them more time to complete it and because we strategically put out those reminders.
But I just want to point that out because sometimes people are like, well, what about, that's not 800. This is actually a really good number for a survey, right? We got kind of either good or lucky there.
Yes. And people, when I have to admit, when I first shared the draft with the draft survey before it went out, people on the committee were like, well, why are you asking all those questions? Because research indicates that having a good relationship with your peer group, with your supervisor, has an impact as to whether or not you're going to stay on the job. Because people, I don't understand, why are you asking them if they have a friend at work? Because it has an impact on whether or not they're going to stay. Because they're like, that seems awfully silly, Jodi. So you have to explain to everyone why you're asking. All of these questions have an impact and have been found in research, whether it's the Society for Human Resource Management or the other, anything that you read out there. So all of these questions had a purpose. We didn't ask things, what's your favorite color and why? Everything was asked with an intent behind it. So, and here we can also see we're at 95.91%. This is amazing. And we were super happy to see that.
I'll say I personally was shocked at this one because as somebody who works with our staff in training and development all the time, I can tell you one of the things that I hear anyway is, wow, nobody gets along with anybody around here and blah, blah, blah. And when we let them anonymously talk about that, we saw, okay, that's not really a trend, right? So maybe what I'm hearing is the loud outliers, but really the trend where there was no reason to say agree, you could have said strongly disagree. The numbers really showed something positive. We're starting with there's some negative ones in here too, don't worry. But this was a good positive one that kind of, I know it shocked me.
I was happy because usually in HR, we're not getting calls saying, I just wanted to call you and let you know I'm having a great day with all my coworkers and my supervisor. Those are not the calls I tend to get in HR. So you tend to get calls from everyone that's having problems, their supervisors harassing them because they're supervising them and their coworkers are bullying them. And so when you see these kinds of numbers, you're like, hey, this is amazing. And that makes me happy.
And the other thing too, Jodi mentioned for a second though, when you're making the survey and if you get feedback on it too, to not get defensive about the question. Because she said, some people might ask, well, why are you asking me this? I encountered people like that. I call them the grumpy pants people who are like, I'm not here to make friends or interact with the coworkers. I'm here to get the job done and I'll interact to the extent possible. And why would I need to do one word more? I say, okay, whatever, you do your thing, but that's not the trend statistically or research wise. We know that's not the trend and that, when people do have good working relationships with their coworkers, it helps, right? So just because some grumpy pants out there has a problem with the question doesn't make it a bad question.
And I actually had a supervisor in a fairly high position, not at the executive level, but I would say mid-management level, call me and say, all of these questions are written in such a positive sense. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, it definitely is leading people how to answer it. And so a question like this, I think that what would she want this to say? I have a horrible relationship with all my coworkers. I mean, I think you set the tone with the way the questions are written. If they don't have a good relationship with their coworkers, they can certainly say disagree or strongly disagree. But I think the survey itself has to be written in the positive tone. I have a strong, I feel strongly about our mission statement. I don't think you want to say, I think Oriana House is a horrible place to work. I just could not understand the mindset the supervisor was coming from when she called me. And I said, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but it was very hard. It was a difficult conversation with the supervisor that I had because I just couldn't understand how she wanted the questions to read.
I have a question actually about that.
Yes.
Is there a way to, I wonder if there's a way to word the questions that say, which best describes your relationship, your working relationships with your coworkers, right? And then you could have good, positive, whatever. I don't know if maybe that is another way to kind of get around that potential issue or if that feels unnecessary.
You could, but then every rating scale that you have with those questions is going to be different.
Mm.
And then
compare though.
And it's going to be more subjective.
Now we did, however, though, Jessica and everybody else, we did do that exact thing with supervisors where we gave them specific supervision qualities and said, hey, rate based on this quality.
Yes.
Right? So we did do that with supervisors, but not with coworkers.
Correct.
It's a little easier to do, I think, with supervisors.
I agree. Looking at this question, number 10, I look forward to coming to work every day. We can see the numbers a little bit lower here. So when you're looking at the agree and strongly agree together, we're talking about 74.32%. So almost 3/4 of the respondents.
But we're not in 95% territory anymore either.
Right, no. So there's a decrease, but still you're talking about 3/4 of the staff. 3/4 of the people who responded to the survey. And then question 15, feeling empowered to make decisions within the scope of my job. We have 85.68% in the agree and strongly agree range. That's pretty phenomenal. And one of the things I want to talk about, which I don't have the numbers here, is when we got the demographics of the staff who responded, I compared those demographics of the respondents to the demographics of the employees at the time who were employed, and they were almost dead on with our numbers. So when that happens, that means that this is a representative sample of the agency. So you can then draw the conclusions that this is an accurate reflection of your population. So if you had overwhelmingly, if we're 65% female, and I have of my sample who responded 65%, it's reflective. But if I had 60% or 70% of male respondents and only 30% females, I know it's going to be tipped more towards males. But when I looked in every category as far as gender and race and position makeup, and as far we broke ours down by county, it was dead on. So I know this is very reflective. We could draw valid conclusions.
We do a lot. She mentioned county, just so you all know. We organize a lot by county in Ohio, like geographically. Yeah. But this question too is a good job. I feel empowered to make decisions within the scope of my job. I'm not just trying to rate how happy you are, right? Like we're tying this right back to an issue that we know we have had in the past, which is, are people comfortable making decisions? Like we know here at our place that a number of our people are not. Like I've been a frontline supervisor here, and I can tell you, as you all know, like getting calls on Thanksgiving and Christmas and all night long. Like sometimes people just are not good at making decisions. So, that was one area we looked at in our survey, was how comfortable are people making decisions? This was an example of one of those questions. So again, I don't want you to think that these questions were just kind of random. They weren't. They all tied back to something we really wanted to try to measure.
And looking at areas that on the Gallup poll where it has been evidence-based and linked directly to job satisfaction. So looking at areas that we know directly impact staff on the job. On question 16, trusting the senior leaders at the agency to make the best decision for employees. We can see here that when you look at the strongly disagree and disagree, we had 34.45% of the staff, almost a quarter, that don't trust the senior leaders. So I know this was something that our executive staff was looking at because they felt a little bit ouchy, and this is something they keep in mind. So how do you work on this? Not quite sure. We saw some trends in our open-ended questions about communication and other things that we need to work on and focus on. But this is something that we need to keep in mind about trust at the senior level.
Yeah, and there's a lot to do in interpreting this kind of thing. Like she said, too, this is really a third of our staff, a little over a third of our staff. And one of the questions that we came back to, like as a big group of people interpreting this, was, do they even really know who these people are? Right? I mean, beyond maybe a name they might see in an email, do they know what they look like? Are they in the programs every day? We operate a lot of smaller programs that might not see senior leaders every day. So there's been a push on that too, just an education post to say, here's their picture, here's who they are. They all have bios now online as a result of this. People can go and see. There's even videos of most of them where they got to just talk about their experience here, so people can feel like they can get to know them a little bit more. So there are real life consequences that come that out of questions like this.
This was a big one, question 17, because we know this has a huge impact on turnover, having a good working relationship with my immediate supervisor. So we had 92.28% in the agree to strongly disagree. So this is phenomenal because this has a significant impact, as we all know, on retention. So we've all heard the phrase, people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. This is a huge one. And we were really happy to see this data because we know LinkedIn will tell us that 75% of workers who voluntarily left their jobs did so because of their bosses and not because of the position itself. This is huge. So we were really happy to see this number, but we don't say, okay, that's super, we're done there. We need to make sure we keep this number looking the way it does. So we congratulate our supervisors. We make sure they're still working on this, that we're looking at this, because this is a huge one for us. Question 20, we wanted to try to see forecast. What do we look like the next few years? We had 78.86, or over three quarters of the respondents say they're going to stick around for the next 2 years. That remains to be said, but so at least we kind of have a little bit of a forecast. But even so, they say 90% of employees who are not actively job seeking would still be open to new job opportunities. So we have to keep that in mind, but you can still kind of take a look at who sees themselves sticking around at least for the next few years. So you have to all take this with a grain of salt, but it might be a good question to ask. Recommending Oriana House to a friend or family member as a place to work. This is, research says that if you would recommend someone to work at the same place you would, that means you're dedicated, that you like it, you're invested. So we had 71.59% in the agree to strongly agree range. So this was a decent number for us.
And that's a good question where you're asking something that you're not asking, right? Mm-hmm. So the truth is, do we really care if people refer people? I mean, it's nice if they do, but that's not what the question was about, right? The question is really getting at, do you like it here enough to tell someone you love to work here, right? Which would mean that, which is consequential if you're
right. If it's no, I would never do that to someone I like,
right.
Or hey, it's okay. The next question, and Jacob talked about this, we really kind of wanted to focus on our supervisors, and these are some of the things that some of these categories that we had the employees rate their supervisors on. We lifted some of these from their performance evaluations. Some of them we lifted from research and different things that we found. So these are the things that we asked employees to rate their supervisors on. And the supervisors actually did pretty well. The highest area where our supervisors were rated on these different categories, the supervisors were rated the highest on having an open door policy, which we were happy to see. And the areas where our supervisors need the most improvement were creating a team atmosphere and then delegating work and disseminating information, which honestly, I did not find surprising because I think we can always work on communication and delegating information. Treatment by a supervisor, as I mentioned before, in the literature, a lot of literature indicates that that might be the most important determinant of retention. So looking at your supervisors and how your employees feel about your supervisors is critical. Interesting timing with some of these things. We applied for a grant through our Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board, a recruitment and retention grant that we did receive. We can use a portion of the grant or a percent of it for recruitment, and then the rest has to be used for retention. So the recruitment portion of the grant, we're going to use to create some video snippets for recruitment based on the types of staff that we do recruit. And then the rest, the retention portion, we're going to use for supervisory training. And we're going to hone in on some of these different areas and upskill some of our supervisors.
Yeah, these 2 slides, right? We did it in like 5 minutes, but there's a year's worth of unpacking to do here, right? Like really getting at, you know, how can we improve our supervisors in some of these areas, right? And that doesn't happen overnight. That doesn't happen with a policy change. It doesn't happen with one training. So, you know, there's a lot still going on and will still be going on for a long time at our agency about these last 2 slides. So while we went over it fast, know that there's a heck of a lot of information that we're looking at here, right? And when you really dig deep into it, again, with that diverse group of people, you can start to plan some of this out to say, okay, how do we address, you know, how do we improve disseminating information, right? Maybe there's simple ways, maybe there's things we didn't think of, right?
The next question, if you could change one thing about your job, this is where you spend a lot of time. You can pull the data from SurveyMonkey into Excel, and then you start coding and sorting and grouping. And then when it all came down to it, we had 112 people say that pay would be the one thing they could change. And that also rated at 26.17%. Then the next highest thing was communication and feedback, which came in at 5.84%. Staffing came in at 5.61%. Their schedule, 4.6%, tied with their workload, 4.6%. Changing things for the clients at 3.74%, management listening to suggestions, those types of things, 2.8%, co-worker relations, 2.34%, and employee retention, 2.34%. So I just, for the purposes of the presentation, just did the top ones, but when the survey results were distributed, I listed all of them so staff could see every single one. But you can see how you have to kind of go through and group everything.
And there was an effort made by Jodi too when she was grouping to make sure she threw in a couple of those examples for each one too. So that people knew, hey, these were based on real stuff, not just arbitrary things that I'm calling staffing, right? The last question that we're going to go over with you today, before we get into some other stuff, what would tempt you to leave the agency?
Right. So asking the staff to select, you can have multi-select question too, where you can have questions where you're forced them to pick only one, multi-select question. So when we ask this question, the number 1 rated question was a pay increase over 10%. So that came out to 76.55. Then the second came out to the better work-life balance, which is what we're seeing more with some of the younger staff who come into the workforce. The next one came out with the ineffective supervisor that would influence them or tempt them to leave. And then the last would be a better work schedule.
So again, you know, to really unpack all those questions, it would take a lot more than an hour and a half, right? So, but these are just give you some examples of what we asked, what we saw, and our results. Now, communicating those results. I kid you not, 1 week after the survey closed, I had an employee emailing me, Jake, when are the results going to be out? We need to see this. And I'm like, whoa, man, this is going to take a long time to like put all these numbers together and categorize. I didn't say that, but people really, and that person wasn't the only one. I mean, people really wanted to see the results of this. So it's important to communicate the results, even if you don't have all of your plans of action in place yet, right? Which you won't for a long time. So it was important to get these results out. So there's different ways to do it, right? In writing, verbally, make sure that there's an opportunity for questions for people to say, well, why'd you ask that question? Or what do these results really mean? And I know at our place here, we did it in 2 groups. So we did it, we did some specific results sharing. So Jodi made a lovely report that like a formal report you could read that had everything in it, right? And then we also had these sessions where you could come, she would go over the results. I was there too, but she did all the work. Go over the results and you could ask questions and all of that, just like we're doing today, but instead of telling you what it is, we would just go over the results. So we did that with 2 groups. We did that with leadership a couple of times. Then we did it with anybody who wanted to come a couple of times. And leaders could come to those free-for-alls too. But we made sure that people had the opportunity to get it, not just in a report, but actually hear it from us and see these things in a nice, pretty view and ask questions if they wanted to. Okay. Oh, there's Jodi. She loves this picture. This is why I threw it in there. She hates it so much. Here's a great example. This was a picture of Jodi doing one of these sessions, right? I took the picture where she, we did a Zoom. A lot of our all staff stuff is done on Zoom because it's just people seem to like it the best. So that's what she was doing here. So it's a good example of, we took a lot of time to have these sessions where people really could hear and ask questions directly from the people who made the survey. I'm going to go a little fast over these next 2 slides, but applying the results, we've kind of already talked about this as we go through, right? But some things that we got out of here. So these are broad things, right? We can, if you have questions later or want to email us or anything, we can get into the specifics. But we found that we needed to have a heightened focus on the mission, right? And we've done that. With new hires now, it's one of the very first things we're talking about after introductions is mission of the agency. And not just, oh, we do community corrections and, behavioral health, like really getting into why are we doing this, right? And that was always there. It's not like we ignored it, but we've tried to put a really heavy emphasis on that as a result of some of this data, right? And reminding people of it too, because it's easy to get lost in their day-to-day work of this big picture of why do I come to do this, right? What's the benefit of the agency, not just my work? We're trying to put more emphasis on supervisor self-awareness. We found that some of our supervisors were not good at identifying their strengths and really not good at identifying their weaknesses. So we've tried to put an emphasis on that. Leadership development in general. We've started doing supervisor boosters, like Jodi said, we have and are going to continue to have some really targeted supervisor training that's beefed up from the traditional stuff we always did. We're starting to have more formal follow-ups with new hires where like HR will actually contact them a week, 2 weeks out from their hire date to say, hey, not just a question like everything okay, but really let's talk about it. Like what's going okay, what's not going okay. Have you met people you need to meet? Are there any issues happening? Right. So there's been a more formal follow-up with the new hires as a result of this. Right. There has been, things are looked at, it is looked at with full circle to exit evaluations too. Was there some stuff we learned here that we'd also like to ask or see on the exit eval, right? Employee comfort was one of our data too that came out, like people wanted to wear jeans every day. And we're not operating prisons, so it's a little different environment, right, than a totally institutional setting, but people really wanted to wear jeans more often. It's like, is there something we can do there, right? Or is there a changing of our dress code that would change, that could actually benefit retention, right? Like, where you might not think, oh, dress code isn't going to keep people here, but can it contribute to the overall environment, right? And then our recruitment and retention committee meets pretty regularly. We're meeting tomorrow, actually. I'm not prepared. We're meeting, so we meet pretty frequently with that committee of people, and this stay interview isn't ignored. It's not like it was done once. Like it's looked at continuously to say, where can we keep improving on these things, right? So again, applying the results, we could do 2 hours just on that. But here's some comedy for you at the end. Here's a swing and a miss question that Jodi threw in It said, describe your work environment with 3 words. I'll let Jodi talk about this one.
I thought this would be a good question to ask because I thought that I might gain some great information from it. However, I don't know. Maybe I should have said 3 adjectives, or I don't know. But I got some sentences. I got some inappropriate adjectives I could not even share. These are things that people had to say as far as their work environment, that we could actually put on paper. It was interesting. So it was a mix of positive and negatives. I think some people thought they had to use 3 words, a 3-word sentence.
Like a really short sentence. Like, it is good.
It depends on who else is working. So someone chose to use more than 3 words. Combustion of mayhem.
That's my favorite thing from this whole survey.
Descriptive. So during the recruitment and retention meeting, we went through all of them. We had a very good laugh and some stress relief. And yeah, that was included in the survey for all the staff to read, but won't be asking that question ever again.
We just didn't learn anything from it, right?
No, we got nothing out of it at all.
And some of the results really were wildly inappropriate too.
Yeah,
like, you had to go on Urban Dictionary to see some of what some of it meant. You know, it was wild. But, yeah. Okay, so there's our phone numbers if you want to write them down or whatnot. I know Jodi would be happy to talk to anybody, as would I. We only left 5 minutes for questions, which might be enough, but might not be. I don't know. But if anybody has any questions or things you'd like to share, go for it.
I wonder if it would be all right to maybe share your emails as well. Yes. And maybe you can just put them in the chat for folks. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Does yours have a middle initial?
No.
And yeah, thank you both so much for a really interesting conversation. I think it's so funny how so much of what you all were sharing kind of overlaps with some of the conversations we've been having as a project. And it was not planned. So clearly there's a lot of sort of universal truths to some of these things. But yeah, great. We have the emails in there. And we do have, like you mentioned, about 5 more minutes if folks have any other questions. Or want to just, jump in and share anything. Otherwise, if you'd like to log out, welcome to. Speaking of surveys, there will be a really short one that will come up as soon as you log out. Just 4 questions, just to let us know sort of what this was like for you, and if we're going to be lucky enough to see you again. I will also say that if you are not signed up for our newsletter, please go to our website and do so. We send out a monthly newsletter with resources and updates on stuff that we're working on, things like this event. And I see a question from Jessica. Hi, Jessica. PowerPoint, please. Yes, we will share the PowerPoint. You'll get a follow-up email with the PowerPoint and the recording of today's session as well. So like I said, we've got a few minutes for any other questions. Otherwise, you all are free to...
I got one more thing, just real quick. Tara,
yes, please.
Tara, I do appreciate the U.S. Census Bureau. I appreciate your husband. I wasn't trying to bash them. It was just a weird situation. I ignored it for so long. They sent 2 things in the mail. Then they sent me emails. Then they showed up at the door. Then they sent another one in the mail. Anyway, I appreciate
you too, she says. Oh, fabulous. I love it.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Doesn't seem like anyone's got any questions, but I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes. Oh, we're getting some thank yous pouring in. Thank you, Jodi and Jacob. That was fabulous.
Thank you.